Massari and Mike Bunt, live from the Cover One Sports Network. Here we go. You are now listening to the Going Deep podcast with your hosts, Kevin Massari and Mike Bunt, live from the Cover One Sports Network. Here we go.
Welcome into a new edition of the Going Deep podcast. I'm your host today, Kevin Massari. I'm here with Mike Bunt, and it's time for training camp. We're going to get into it. We're going to get into the AFC in general. Talked about the AFC East the last episode, so tune into last episode where we break down our predictions, what Mike thinks about the division, what I think about the division, players, where the Bills are, their strengths against the AFC East, and their roster in general. Today, we're going to talk about countdown to training camp mixed in with the AFC talk, where this roster ranks, where we think it ranks as not only training camp's coming up, but our first preseason game is just around the corner. It's really not that far away for when they're actually playing football. And we'll see, what games did Josh Allen play? Does he play one series? Going to get a little bit into that and more. But first, Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kevin. We're 8 days away from Bills training camp. It gets real in about a week. The rookies reporting today. I can't wait to get to St. John Fisher a little over a week from now, watch some football, and finally be talking about some of these positional battles going on. And also, thank God DeAndre Hopkins' watch is finally over. And we don't need to talk about, is he going to consider Buffalo, or is he going to go to KC, New England, Tennessee? Is he going to go for a winner? Is he going to take the money? I think you and I always thought the money was going to be the higher of the two priorities. We ended up being correct, but thank God that's all over with.
Yeah, I mean, look, we don't have to talk about it anymore. It looks like 2 for 26. I think is a tick more than I thought he'd get at this stage. It's a little bit less than OBJ, not incredibly lower. OBJ's deal is truly a one-year deal. Hopkins has a lot more flexibility in his deal. Once I see exactly how it's broken down, I'll dissect into it more maybe as the offseason goes. Just curious as the offseason goes on, Mike. But it starts off with the roster discussion as we go into camp. We saw a September deal for Dawson Knox last year. Do you think the Ed Oliver extension is the only one that stands? Or do you, like I tweeted early, do you think that a Gabe Davis deal gets done in late August, early September, kind of kick off to the season before maybe now that he's the receiver too, before he prices himself out in Tremaine Edmonds fashion? Did the Bills learn from the situation with Tremaine Edmonds, or are they going to double down in the situation and hope that he comes in less, kind of the bank that they made on Tremaine Edmonds? Or do you see that the main focus right now might be after Tyler Bass's extension, might be on Gabe Davis? What's your opinion on that now that that money that maybe they were thinking about spending on Hopkins can be utilized elsewhere?
Yeah, I certainly think it's a possibility. You and I have been speculating going back 2-3 months that we thought that the Bills were looking to try to extend him. A lot of that before all the DeAndre Hopkins watch was going on with those rumors swirling around. Now that that's over with, I do expect to see some clarity going forward. If I'm the Bills, I'm trying to get something done now with Gabe Davis. I think he's primed to have a strong season with this offense, the way everything is situated at the current moment. You look at the numbers he put up last year, even with the drops, the ankle sprain, and some of the limitations. If you factor in all that stuff, he should still be around those same numbers, if not better, this season. So if I'm the Bills, I'm trying to get him to an extension now where you can maybe save a few $1,000,000 rather than wait and see what happens to his value next year, and then put yourself in a situation where you either have to pay him the big money or then go towards the draft or some other way of replacing him. I don't think Gabe will be a crazy number amount at the current moment. Now, he's gonna bank on himself and say, well, I'm deserving of $15+ million a year, but I really do think the Bills can get it done for less than that amount at the current moment.
Yeah, I mean, all we can do is bring up his spot track projected values. I know the Bills have been getting players for less than their projected values. That's a Brandon Bean special. We saw it with Damian Harris, Rapp, with Leonard Floyd. We've seen it across Puna Ford. We've seen it across the league that the Bills are signing players that are under their Spot Track market value. And Spot Track's not perfect. They swing and miss a lot, but they do try to use comp deals based on their statistical probabilities in years past, their statistical numbers. So for me, it's a matter of, can he over exceed those statistical probabilities that he, I'm hoping he does. So his similar comparisons, $12.4 million, 4 years for $49 million. I don't think that that's far off. I think the Bills could probably get it a tick lower, but I think that that's fairly accurate. And I don't think you can sit there and be like, oh, that's egregious either way. I think that that's fairly accurate. You look at the Christian Kirk deal, one deal bringing it up. The other couple examples should be examples that would bring it down, But, Michael Gallup got about 11 per year is about what I'm expecting. Russell Gage's deal 3 for 30 at the time is actually statistically very common. Michael Gallup's deal, Hunter Renfro's deal is actually fairly similar, but he got 16 million per. And then you have Alan Lazard's deal as well. So there's definitely some statistical analysis that says he should be between 10 and 13, Mike. I think the Bills are probably trying to come in more around that 10 number. If we're, totally being fair. 9 to 10. It's kind of like Milan. It's like kind of what they do. And if they could kind of maybe increase it a little bit and Gabe's willing to take less, I think that something could get done. But I'm thinking that 3 for 30 deal that Russell Gage signed is at 26 years old, very similar, as much to where they'd like to be with Gabe. And a lot of, believe it or not, like game played percentage is on par. Reception targets per game is on par. Receptions per game is on par. Yards per game, Russell Gage actually had more before his extension. The touchdowns, obviously, something that Gabe excels in. He's higher than most people in general, not even just his comparables with that statistic. But Gage had a bigger yak, actually similar drop percentage. So they're very similar deals. And like I really, signed a little while ago, a couple of years ago, so it might be outdated. So that's really where I bump it up to the Alan Lazard deal. And that's really one where I figure like, hey, receiver 2, going to now having a top quarterback. There's a lot of similarities there with Alan Lazard and his playing style. 788 yards and 6 touchdowns, 13.1 yards average, just raw statistically, is a very similar deal that I do believe the Bills are probably targeting when it comes to Gabriel Davis. So that's 4 for 44 is what he got. I would imagine the Bills would be okay with that. They'd probably want more of that 4 for 40. But he's going to say like, look, you can't even give me Alan Lazard money. So I think that that's something to keep track of, Mike. And would you be comfortable with him in that range we're talking about here? Do you want him for less?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you're comfortable.
I'm fine if you go up to around 13 million a year.
Okay.
I don't think you need to get to that point, but if that's what it takes to close him, I'm not going to be upset with that, because I really do think Gabe Davis is a guy, given his early production with the Bills, that could be potentially a 1,000-yard receiver in his future, or a guy that could be 8-9 touchdowns in a season in the future. Not saying that it's a guarantee, but you look at the progression from his career already, where you go from being a 4th-round pick to you're around 35 receptions your first 2 years each, where you're getting around 7 touchdowns. You have the monster playoff game against the Chiefs that everybody remembers, over 200 yards, 4 touchdowns. We all remember the Colts playoff game where he was doing the toe tapping drill on the sidelines, making big plays in that playoff game. So he does have the ability to elevate his game to another level at important times. And because of that, that's why there was so much disappointment last year when he didn't really meet the high expectations of the fan base that wanted 1,000 yards, wanted maybe the 8, 9, 10 touchdowns. But because of that, we sometimes have a tendency to overreact the other way and kill a guy that still had nearly 50 receptions, over 830 yards, 7 touchdowns. He was 15th, tied for 15th in touchdowns for receptions. And you were talking about one of the better number 2 receivers in the league. Now, I know there's some data out there that shows his route tree was limited and that he doesn't run certain things great, but that's also stuff that's within the design of the Bills offense. When you're having him run moderate length routes and you're having his average depth of target be more downfield, you are limiting his reception numbers because he is getting more contested throws and more difficult reception opportunities in front of him. So there's a lot of receivers that benefit off of the short passing game. I know that's not Gabe Davis's go-to, but he doesn't really get those freebies like many other number 2 receivers might get in the league. So I'm cool with anywhere from 10 to 13 million. Obviously would prefer it to be closer to 10 than 13, but if the Bills and Davis can find something within that range, I am totally on board, Kevin.
For sure, Mike. Smash that like button. Appreciate you, Seth. Definitely really key to help us bring great content all season long. Next week, it's going to be great to have people from all of our Cover One assistant in the branding, Mike. So it's going to be, it's definitely going to be a fun and great opportunity to get together as a unit. Anyways, Mike, so tell me a little bit about your opinion on how this offensive roster looks.
So I like it. To me, this is an upgraded offense. We talked about our positional expectations. Is an upgrade? Is it a downgrade? We talked about that about a month ago. But overall, this offense looks solid. I think running back, you could make an argument. Maybe it's a slight downgrade because Devin Singletary's no longer in the room. But I do like the versatility of our RB room going forward with guys like Latavius Murray, Damian Harris, and Hines to go with James Cook. Tight end, obviously a huge upgrade. You already have one of the top 10 guys, and then you add Dalton Kincaid to the mix, which is definitely exciting as well. I hope you're still here, Kevin. I know we don't have your video anymore going forward, but and then the wide receiver room. I love the competition. I bringing in Hardy. You still have Trent Sherfield now into the mix to go with Davis and Diggs, and the offensive line battles at left guard, right guard, and some of the depth at right tackle. So I like this offense, but I definitely want to get into some of the positional battles because there are some battles that will be going on in training camp with this unit. Kevin, do we still have you?
You do, Mike.
What was going on there, man?
No, nothing. So the biggest battle for me, I think, going into this is right guard. So I think that right guard is a decent opportunity that I don't think O'Cyrus Torrence is just given this right guard job. I think that he'll take it at some point. But I don't think that right guard is just a shoo-in for being O'Cyrus Torrence. That's the one note that I had here, that I think that Ryan Bates could sneakily start. Mike, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think Ryan Bates definitely has an opportunity to start. It's going to be a battle. You have a second rounder coming in. He's definitely going to want to compete for the position. Now, are the Bills going to give him some time and to learn behind Bates, or are they going to have a competition? We'll see. If I'm looking at the offense right now, the positional battles that I see in front of me are wide receiver 3. Who's going to be the third wideout behind Diggs and Gabe Davis? Is it going to be Hardy? Does Khalil Shakir get an opportunity to step up into a more prominent role? Does Trent Sherfield enter that battle based on what he did last year with the Dolphins? Left guard, right guard. I go into training camp thinking that we're at least going to see somewhat of a competition in both of those. I know Connor McGovern is the presumed starter at left guard, but we can't forget that David Edwards does have plenty of starting experience with the Rams, and he's probably not coming into Buffalo with the expectation of just handing the job over to McGovern. At right guard, you would think, based on last year, that Bates would be the guy, but O'Cyrus Torrence, Kev, like we said, we thought he could have gone late first round. For a guy like that to fall to the Bills in the 50s, he definitely has to at least have a chance if he looks like he fits the part early in training camp. Obviously, if he looks horrible early on, you can just go with Bates and not worry about it. But I definitely want to see how he's looking, at least through the early part of the preseason, and see if he's deserving of being in a competition with Bates.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion point. And like you said, David Edwards is a good talk as well, coming over from a Super Bowl winning team at the time. I didn't have the world's best season last year. So I think the guard spot's a pretty interesting battle as we approach training camp. That's one that I just have my eye on. Will he be gifted the job in O'Cyrus Torrence? I don't think that that's true. I don't know that he's just gifted the job. I think the team really likes Bates. So it's I don't know, a second round pick, middle to late second round, really late second round pick. Does that person just get to walk in with the culture that Sean McDermott drives? I think that's an underrated talking point that we're just assuming he starts day one right guard. I don't think that that's necessarily true, Mike. So I think that the way that McDermott likes it, I definitely don't think you'll see it early on. Now, does he end up winning it come week one? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's possible, but I definitely don't think you see him take the job with the ones for the majority of August. I think that it'll be one of those earn it type of positions when it comes to the guard spot there for O'Cyrus Torrence. And then Spencer Brown, much talked about. Spencer Brown is in a battle with Shell. I mean, a guy coming over from Miami with a lot of starting experience. Where does David Quesenberry fit in this mixture? So there's a lot to think about when it comes to the offensive line. There's a lot of new pieces, and I don't think that anybody has the best idea how it could turn out. We all have our guesses, but as terms of who's going to make it, the 9 or 10 players, as well as who's going to start with the 5, we think we know, but I think we could be shocked come middle of August of how it could turn out.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. I think if you went into camp, the presumed starters on the line, obviously you have Deion Dawkins, left tackle. You got Morse at center. That's easy. Spencer Brown, right tackle, should be there unless he really looks horrendous in camp. It's McGovern, I think, his left guard is what most people are presuming at this point. And then the only real one that people I think are questioning a bunch is Bates and Torrance. So I think during the draft, a lot of us thought Torrance would have a chance to win it. We'll see how that plays out. Either way, I think this line has improved from what we saw last year. Saffold was a huge liability, was one of the worst guards in the league last year, which was unfortunate because the Bills brought him in for an upgrade, which just shows like you can bring in these guys and they don't have to necessarily live up to your expectations of what you think you're getting from them. On paper, this line looks pretty good outside of right tackle, at least from a pass protecting standpoint. How is Spencer Brown going to acclimate? We're hearing stuff that he feels better than he has in 3 years since he was at Northern Iowa. So hopefully that's a positive sign for him going forward. And like we said, they do have some insurance options in Quesenberry and Brandon Shell if Brown does continue to struggle. So I think one of the biggest things from this Bills offseason was they wanted to have depth at almost every position. They didn't want what happened last year to impact them once again this year. And that is when you go through a mass amount of injuries, let that derail your season. And granted, they still went 13-3, won a playoff game, but it really did derail them when you got to that Cincinnati game and they had nothing left in their tank with as far as who they had out there and what they could bring to the table. You look at right tackle. Is Shell even that much worse than what Spencer Brown has been in the last couple of years? Probably not. On paper, based on the metrics, they're comparable. Now, I'm a believer in Spencer Brown's upside, so I definitely want him to earn the position and keep the role, because if he doesn't, that means we're not going to get solid production out of our right tackle this year. When you look at Torrance versus Bates, I think either way you're going to get something pretty average, nothing great, nothing horrible. Left guard, that's going to be one of the questions. Connor McGovern, we know he is a good blocker. In the pass game. Pass protection, very solid. Run game, though, a little bit of a liability. David Edwards, though, you get a little bit better in the run blocking. So it's going to be interesting how this line molds together, builds that continuity. And then when you are looking at the other stuff we were talking about, I am really intrigued, Kev, with this wide receiver 3 battle, just because when you're talking about the names like Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield, you're not talking about known commodities in the league. You're talking about guys that have been around and really haven't produced at a super high level. Now, I know it's Dalton Kincaid is going to be the slot. He's going to be the one receiving the majority of the looks early on in the season. But is Deontay Hardy a guy that can step up and be an impact player? Will he be like Isaiah McKenzie, maybe even better, a guy that can get you 35 to 45 catches and maybe 500, 600 yards? Or does Trent Sherfield end up being that guy winning the job based on his experience and what he can bring to the offense? That is one battle I do want to talk about, because depending on who you talk about, there's Khalil Shakir truthers, there's Deontay Hardy fans, there's Trent Sherfield fans. I know it's a lot of talk for wide receiver number 3 and probably the 4th or 5th receiving target on the team, depending on what they do with Knox and Kincaid. But that is an interesting battle that could be shaping up in camp in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, good question by Paul. Do you think the chemistry could be an issue early on with all these new pieces to the O-line? Yes, I think that could be. But at the same time, you may have as many as 4 returning starters, depending how it all plays out, especially if Bates wins a job to either spot, I guess. So you could have as many as 4 returning starters, replacing Roger Saffold, who was your weakest link. So I think when you have 3 or more, you're okay. When you start to get into some teams turn over the entire O-line, or there's only 1 or 2 remaining, that can get into an issue. But I think with the 3+, I think you're in good shape. But especially as you add 4 and the same O-line coach, I'm not as worried about the continuity there and chemistry with the players, especially the tackles are going to be the same. The center is going to be the same almost for sure. And then, you may have some guard movement, both of them, one of them, or I mean, it's going to be at least one, I would assume, but it could be both of the guards that are affected. So I don't overly see it, especially because you're going to be next to somebody who has been in this offensive line for at least many years. And most of their cases, they've all been here multiple years. So I don't necessarily see any chemistry problems with the offensive line. I only think it's going to be an upgrade. Offensive line is good as its weakest link. And last year it was weak with Roger Saffold and at times Spencer Brown. So I think that definitely could be a major issue if he doesn't rebound. But I do believe that there's many theories within the locker room that Spencer Brown is back and he looks good and he's off that back injury. By all accounts, from what I was told, he shouldn't have been playing last year. So I'm not exactly sure what the philosophy was with wanting him to play. Maybe they wanted him to get experience anyways. I'm not exactly sure what the decision was for him to play. Maybe they realized he couldn't hurt it more and he was willing to play. But he did fight through it and probably shouldn't have played, Mike, with the amount of pre-game medicine.
I think the thought process was we don't really have much behind him, which you did bring in Quesenberry to be an upgrade at your depth, but they must have not have felt that way once the season got underway. But they did bring Quesenberry back. So I do kind of agree with Spinning here, too, that Saffold was specialized in run blocking, not pass blocking, focused on the wrong thing, and now he's correcting it by bringing in McGovern, who is the opposite, better at pass protection than run blocking. That's spot on to me with what Spin said there. And when you think about it, Saffold was so awful last year. Really, you bring in even someone that's not good, and it's still probably at least equal to what you had. Instead, you bring in someone that, by all intents and purposes, is at least average at left guard in Connor McGovern. So I do think that's an upgrade, even if it's not a massive upgrade. It is someone that will help you out in pass protection, which when you're a team like the Bills that goes through the air as much as they do, that's the priority. McGovern's run blocking metrics, they're not good. His grades on PFF are near the bottom in that regard. So don't expect the Bills to be following McGovern to wide open holes in the run game. But as far as giving Josh the time he needs in the pocket, you probably helped yourself out in that area. And then right guard, like we said, that's going to be the one area, if Bates doesn't win the job, you might have some questions with an Osiris Torrance lining up next to a Spencer Brown. Would starting a rookie right guard next to what some people would consider the biggest liability going into your season on your offensive line at right tackle and Spencer Brown, is that the smartest approach to open a year? So if you look at it from that angle, maybe that gives Ryan Bates a little bit of an advantage going to camp, plus his years of experience already starting on this team. So I think we're looking at really a line that's going to have 4 returning starters on it, with left guard being the main change. But we'll see. Right guard is one of the whole. I think we know what we're going to see, but it's not a locked in result. As you said, sometimes camp things just happen, and you end up starting opening day with a completely different look than what you might have thought.
Yeah, one injury, maybe one of the tackles does get hurt. Injuries aside, you would think 4 could be starting. I think we've written off Bates too quickly. And why not use Osiris Torrance if one of those players get hurt, or if they're ineffective, or many different reasons. But we'll have to see how or if, because Bates is your primary backup left guard and center. So who knows?
That's the interesting case, because if Morse goes down, does Bates move to center, and then you have Torrance start at right guard? Yes. So there's injuries that can change how this plays, and obviously we have to see how these guys all come together in camp as well. So I like this unit. I don't think they're going to be the liability that they were last year. Obviously, it was a big time struggle in 2022, and Josh took a lot of hits and a lot of pressures as a result. I think it's going to be better this year, Kev. A lot is still unknown, but Spencer Brown needs to take that next step. Otherwise, he's not going to have a hold on that right tackle position for that much longer. There's only so much time and opportunities you can give to a 3rd round pick from a small FCS type school that hasn't earned the reps. Right now, he's gotten the reps based on his athletic profile, on his draft position, and his potential and upside. But at some point in time, the Bills are going to have to see more than that from Spencer Brown to justify him to continue being the starting right tackle.
Yeah, and Diggs and Davis are 1 and 2. Wide receiver 3 could be by committee. Sure, absolutely. And that also leads into the chemistry of really only maybe just right guard, maybe left guard being the only positions that aren't the same from last year, more or less. Slot could be one, I guess, by Sherfield, or I guess Kincaid. But it could still be, I guess Khalil Shakir could take it. There's still options of players who are on this roster last year could step up and inherit that slot position.
Let's talk about
Knox returning. Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Where do you stand? Because I know this conversation isn't really the most important one, because Kincaid is the presumed number 3 offensive weapon target guy. So if we just call Dalton Kincaid a wide receiver, we would pencil him in as wide receiver 3,
sure,
and your slot receiver right away. But since he is a tight end, and that's what he's going to be labeled, people are going to have this conversation for wide receiver 3, even though it's not the traditional wide receiver 3 that the Bills would have. Which direction do you think is the most favorable heading into camp? Do you think there will be a solid number 3 guy, or is it a committee? And each guy, could they have slightly different roles?
It's interesting because I'm leaning towards slightly different roles. I don't know that it's going to be an every down starter / slot receiver like Cole Beasley and Dalton Kincaid, but I could be proven wrong here in just a few weeks. I don't know that that's the way it's going to go. I do think they're going to find, plays for Deontay Hardy in the slot and in the boundary. You kind of replacing guys when they need a blow in both spots. I think you're obviously, I'm high on Sherfield. A couple other people are. I think that he does blocks really well. He does a lot of things you're looking for out of the slot, has good routes, is speedy, was a good supplement, did beat out a really overpriced and expensive Cedric Wilson in Miami. I was able to beat out his competition there. So I think that, and then he plays force phase of special teams on a side note, but I think that he's a very interesting player that's going to get snaps. I don't know how many yet, but he's going to get snaps. And then you have Khalil Shakir, everybody's favorite, can play a lot of different, unit positions and receiver formations as well. So you're going to have a different formation for everybody in general. So that's what I think about that, Mike, is that I think that you're going to get a gamut of different players. And then obviously the continuity of Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis is only going to help that slot position, work out.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I will say this. I do think maybe there is something to they'll attack it by committee early on, but I am very high on Deontay Hardy. I think the Bills brought him in to add another dimension to this offense. I'm not saying he's going to be a 50, 60 catch guy who's going to be a high impact player, but I do think he's being brought in to be a 30 plus reception guy who can add more speed, that can bring you more versatility. He can do the gadget things that Isaiah McKenzie used to do for this offense before he became the slot guy. He can go outside and run a decent route tree. He has explosiveness with the ball. The one thing that with McKenzie that always kind of bothered me a little bit was he had the straight line speed and he had the quickness, but he didn't really have the ability to move around. His agility, his side-by-side approach, you could get a finger on him and he's going down, and it kind of limited the Bills in the pass game. I think with Deontay Hardy, you can open things up a little bit more. You look at his numbers a couple years ago with New Orleans, where he had nearly 600 yards. It was averaging nearly 16 yards per reception. And he did that in, I think, 12 games. So, like, you do that over 12, 13 games. You do that over the course of a full season. He had a chance to be – he could have been a 700-plus yard guy. And last year, obviously, was dealing with a foot injury that limited him. But the Bills gave him a contract that was more than double what Isaiah McKenzie was getting paid last year. To me, that tells me they think that this guy has a definite role in this offense. Now, it'll be interesting because, like you said, he's not necessarily a slot guy, so he can bring different things to the table. You could have him on the field when Kincaid is your slot guy, and you can move him around. Now, I still think there's hope for Khalil Shakir too. Obviously, a fifth-round pick last year. You didn't see much of the regular season, but they did start using him in the playoffs, and some of his separator numbers were pretty solid at some point. So I think the true battle isn't whether Deontay Hardy is battling Khalil Shakir or Trent Sherfield for the 3 spot. I think regardless of what happens in camp, Deontay Hardy has a role or a niche carved out on this offense. I think the battle is Khalil Shakir versus Trent Sherfield for one of the final receiver roles for who's going to actually be on the field, who's actually going to have a chance to contribute. And all things equal, I think Khalil Shakir should have the advantage because you invested a 5th-round pick in him a year ago, and you have him on a rookie contract where you're paying him relatively cheap amount of money. So Sherfield, to me, is insurance for Khalil Shakir. If Shakir doesn't take that step forward this year and you feel like you still need another developmental year for him.
Yeah, so to bring some statistics to Hardy to kind of couple your point, he's played 41% in the slot, 55.8% out wide. So he actually has significantly more, 235 snaps at the boundary receiver position, kind of like you see at Tyreek Hill is the idea there. His yak ability is very strong, 484 career yak. Yards after catch, 6.6 additional yards, yards per route ran at 2.28, which is what the statistics were that the Bills really liked. They liked his A dot is 7.8. So there's a lot of 2021. He was actually really good. Most people don't realize, like, he still played a fairly limited role, but he was a really good receiver. And if he would have kept that up, he would have been one of those sneaky guys that got paid this season, like a Christian Kirk or whatever, because he was on, that's why he got his contract. I mean, he was on pace to get a fairly decent contract. And then obviously, went out really early in the year last year. So it's going to be very, very telling to see where they use him. But I think they've already labeled him a receiver 4. They want him inside and outside because his body of work says that he can do both. 173 snaps from the slot. So remains to be seen, which is fairly limited. Remains to be seen how he does in the slot because we actually have more evidence how good he is out wide, and a lot of his wide advanced analytics really popped to me. And the yards per route ran at 2.69. That's how many yards he was getting every time he ran a route, factoring in drops and completions going somewhere else. That's a big number. So that's a number that you're looking for from your gadget players and or players. That's a number that sticks out to you in the community of a high-end receiver 1. So obviously, as usage goes up, and I'm not saying Hardy's usage will go up, but if it does, obviously his effectiveness would go down from that number. Just how anything works in the NFL across, even in life, as you use something more, you do something more, and the effectiveness could go down, but it's still maybe at a clip that's very useful. However, in a limited use, those are very good numbers and ones that I believe the Bills probably clawed into when they decided early on in free agency, decided to give him a contract as one of their really, before some of the big D line and other players, he was one of the big guys that they went out and like, we want him on our roster. We're going to cut McKenzie for him. So it was no coincidence that they looked at some of these statistics and see that he can bounce in and out, maybe bounce in when someone needs a blow on the inside, bounce out when you're taking out Gabe Davis. The flexibility that they're looking for from him would have been a healthy Deontay Hardy, would have been someone very, very useful for this roster last year, especially. And I think even Trent Sherfield would have helped. And, that's Dalton Kincaid aside, a couple of these receivers the Bills could have utilized badly at times last year. As funny as that is to say, we're just talking about Hardy and Sherfield here, but they could have used them badly, especially at times late in the season when Gabe was a little banged up and they weren't getting a production from McKenzie, and they're calling John Brown and Cole Beasley back in and others to try to get the job done. So the Bills offense as a whole, you're going to return the core of it. You're going to fill in some of the weaknesses at guard. We'll see what happens at tackle. Slot is definitely going to get an upgrade. You're going to get the depth of a receiver upgraded. Now you have Khalil Shakir maybe in a receiver 5 role at the moment, receiver 5, receiver 6, but at any moment can pop and or win a job somewhere. So it is a much better unit. And then you have Shorter, who's going to be able to play, pretty much every, he's a boundary receiver, but he's going to be able to play teams. He said he would. He'd take a jersey to do that on game day. So you're going to have a multitude of different players dressed. You're probably going to have all 6 of them dressed most likely. And then obviously probably just have the 2 tight ends. I don't know if there's a roster spot for Quentin Morris right now, Mike. I don't see it because of the versatility at the receiver role and then what Kincaid can do. And then obviously if Reggie Gilliam doing some versatile offensive pieces. I don't know that I may see him making the roster. I definitely don't see him on an active game day without an injury to his receiver or one of the 2 tight ends. So I think we'll see if they hold on to him. I definitely know they probably like him on the practice squad for sure. But what do you think? Do you think they use that final roster spot there, or what do you think?
I wouldn't rule against it, Kev.
Okay.
I don't think you can rule against it. Last year, did they have a need for keeping Tommy Sweeney and Quentin Morris? No, but they did anyway. So I still think there could be a chance Quentin Morris could make this team. I really do. When you look at it, I don't want to even consider Dalton Kincaid a tight end this year, Kev. I know he still is. It's going to be considered 12 personnel when he's on the field. He can go in line and block once in a while. But I really do think they're going to, at least from the beginning of the year, primarily let him focus as being a receiver. To me, that's the easiest way to transition into the league. Do what you're best at. And that is go in the slot, run routes, catch the ball. Learn that part of the game first. It's hard for a lot of these tight ends to transition to the NFL because they're learning 2 things. They're basically learning to be a lineman at the NFL level with blocking and that side of the game. And then they're learning the route trees and getting on the same page with the quarterback. What the Bills need more than another tight end on the line is a tight end that could be a threat in the passing game and in the slot. So I do think you still would want to have a primary backup to Dawson Knox on the line, because if Dawson Knox goes down and you just decide to put Kincaid on the line, then you're taking away one of your threats in the slot, and you're putting someone there that's really not his strength at this point in time. So to me, I think it's still very important to have an inline tight end in case something ever did happen to Knox. Now, if Kincaid goes down, you could replace his production by simply putting a receiver in the slot and addressing it that way. So I do think it's still going to be important to keep some tight ends on this team. And one thing I do want to add to the wide receiver conversation that we were saying, I look at Deontay Hardy as the biggest wild card on this offense. What he can bring from a matchup ability, yards after catch, and just some of the other things he has can really make a true difference for this offense this year. Now, we'll have to see if it all comes to fruition or not. But if you're going to ask me who among these wide receivers that's not Diggs or Davis, who could end up being a special player, it's Hardy. I know we had the little talk, Sherfield, Khalil Shakir, where do they line up? At the end of the day, I don't think Khalil Shakir or Sherfield are really making much of a difference on this team. I know there was one comment that mentioned from AJ, appreciate the comment, that would give the advantage to Sherfield right now because of his blocking over Khalil Shakir. I guess that's a possibility. And then I don't think that's really going to make much of a difference. If Sherfield's on the field, you're talking about as the fourth wide receiver, how often is he going to be blocking in a situation that's going to make I'm not saying he won't do it, but how critical of a component is that going to end up being? I know we talk about Sean McDermott and this coaching staff and how much they respect the different fundamentals of the game. But when I look at this team, Sherfield's the fifth best receiver. So I'm not saying he won't earn a spot or beat out Khalil Shakir, but I want to see my young 20-something receiver get a spot over a 27-year-old who's on his third team in his career and hasn't been able to really earn a prominent role in 5 years in the NFL. We talk about how expectations work. We soured on McKenzie last year after having 40-plus catches. Trent Sherfield had 30 catches on an offense that had Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Theoretically, he should have had a lot more opportunities. And also, when we go deeper into it, Isaiah McKenzie has double the amount of catches that Trent Sherfield has his entire career. If we're even looking at Deontay Hardy versus Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy has done more, and he is at a younger age. So I know that there's a lot of people enamored with the thought of Trent Sherfield, but we have to remember this is a guy that has been primarily a depth person who, outside of last year, has averaged around 9 to 10 catches a year in his NFL career.
One thing to remember, though, it's not just, I think it's a really good point, though, Mike. He's an elite blocker. He's not just a okay guy getting away. He's on Robert Woods' level of blocking. So I think that's something to remember. 104 zone blocking plays last year for Trent Sherfield, 68 out of gap. So he blocked for 201 plays last year. So, I mean, it's a significant amount. It isn't like he did pretty good in 40 snaps and, had showed some flashes. He's an elite blocker out of the slot. And also, most people don't realize, they think that his only ability is slot. I don't know. That's, I think, where Brandon B may have said really early on, in March, that might be where he's could win a job. It's only because he's not going to beat out Steph or Gabe on the outside. However, we can't forget that he took just as many snaps from the boundary last year. So it's another boost in situation where you need him.
And Kev, I'm not going to say that he's not going to see the field. I'm just saying there's people that think he's going to be the number 3 wide receiver on this team. And my argument would be he's not going to be a more productive receiver in the passing game than Deontay Hardy this year. And this is the way I look at it. We already have Diggs. He's going to get his 100 catches. He's going to get his 160 targets. If you think if Davis reduces the drops, he gets anywhere from 55 plus catches going forward. I think you're looking at Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. They're at least combining for close to 90 to 100, depending on that. I think Dawson Knox is going to be the guy that capitalizes the most off of having Kincaid on this team. I still believe Dawson Knox is going to be a 35 to 50 reception guy on this team. And this could actually take some of the pressure off of him. James Cook is going to get around 40 receptions. If you assume that Deontay Hardy could be a 35 reception, 40 reception guy. I'm not saying all these guys will be exactly here because obviously you only have so many footballs to throw around. But where are the balls for Khalil Shakir or Trent Sherfield on this offense? There really is not that much. If you're assuming that the 2 tight ends and 3 receivers are already ahead of you, you're talking about, and then you add James Cook, that's 6 players that are going to be ahead of Sherfield and Khalil Shakir, and as far as what should be targets. So how many targets do you have left if you're getting to your 7th person
I think Judge broke it down, didn't he? I don't have the exact numbers, but he broke down on average how many targets would be left, and it's a lot. from players that they targeted last year. And sure, I guess they could all go to Dalton Kincaid. Very possible Dalton Kincaid in a Hardy mixture. But there are significantly more targets available. And I think, I'll try to reference that one at some point. I don't have it handy of Judge breaking down exactly how many there were, but I found it actually personally kind of eye-opening. And that's where I started to come around on the idea of if we're going to think modest numbers, depends. If we think Kincaid's going for 80, breaking records and breaking rookie records and doing something no one else has done, then there's a lot of.
Let's look it up. Let's make this even easier. We can go straight to Pro Football Reference, and obviously they only played 16 games last year, so that's gonna change
another game's worth of targets. Yep.
Yeah, so you lose probably like 30. Just want to see if I can. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you go to targets on the Bills last year, the number 7 guy on the team in targets was Khalil Shakir with 20. Right. And then it's Jamison Crowder. So the targets last year were 154 for Diggs, 93 for Gabriel Davis, 65 for McKenzie, 65 for Knox, 52 for Singletary, then 32 for Cook. So you're already talking about down to 32 targets for your number 6 guy on the team. Now, Diggs is going to be in the 160 range. Davis is presumably going to still be at around that 90 point. Who takes over McKenzie's 65? I've been saying I think Deontay Hardy is going to get a lot of what McKenzie was. So, and then you add in Dalton Kincaid. Even if you add 30 more throws for week 17, there isn't 50, 60 targets to separate. You're talking about.
Well, how many did McKenzie? You got McKenzie, you have Singletary, Brown, and Beasley. What are their 4 totals?
No, and so Brown and Beasley, Beasley, we got to remember regular season, like he was barely even part of
that's okay.
the discussion. And same with Brown. So you take out Singletary, that's 52 targets, and then McKenzie was 65. So that's 52 and 65. That's 117. So I think that could be Deontay Hardy.
You're already factoring Shakir getting 30 from those numbers. So you're talking about, that's probably accurate. I don't know if he'll get many more than that. We'll see. But you're talking about 117, and then Quentin Morris had targets. So you're factoring in, and
Quentin Morris had 11 targets the whole season.
That's okay. That's still 11 targets you can put in the pot.
What I'm saying though is, at the end of the day, all talk about Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield. It's not, are you going to be a prominent player in this offense? Neither of them are going to come into this offense and be highly productive from a statistical standpoint unless there's injuries to the people ahead of them. And obviously that's a possibility. But when you're looking at us, this was the whole point I was talking about Hopkins too. Even if they brought in Hopkins, Hopkins wasn't going to be a 100 catch guy, a 90 catch guy. He was going to be a 65 catch guy on this Bills team. The way they have it all set up, they don't have a million footballs to go around right now. There's just not enough attempts. And if anything, the Bills will hopefully try to stay where they are passing attempts, maybe even go down. There were some games where they threw a crazy amount of times that was kind of unnecessary. I know the Bills are a pass-first team, but you want to be playing from ahead and ideally running the ball in the second half, keep the clock going if you can get out to big leads or whatnot. So I guess my big thing is I like the signing of Trent Sherfield. I like what he can do from a run blocking perspective. I think he provides quality depth and he will be a solid special teamer. But I don't think he was brought in to be a 40 catch guy on this team, especially when you're talking about a guy that has around 65, 66 catches for his career. This is going to be an offense that already has its main guys. And when you're talking about Dalton Kincaid being basically probably the third target and being the slot guy, and then you factor in Knox, I just don't know how a wide receiver 4 or a wide receiver 5 is going to end up having much of a role on this team.
Also, make sure you check out our brand new Cover One store. We've been asked many times over the years about it. So get out there and check it out. I just retweeted it from Cover One, cover1-sports.myshopify.com. 10% off at checkout right now. So make sure you check out some of our merch. Great stuff from Adidas and other Champion, whatever it is that you like, that we have many different designs that were finally overhauled. If you like hats, tanks, sweaters, we got it all there. So make sure you check that out from the Cover One shop. Really cool looking stuff. Smash that like button while you're at it if you are interested in this at all discussion about targets. But what's interesting, Mike, is that there's still, 40 targets in the next game that they didn't have because of week 17. Singletary's targets, I don't believe, are all just going to go to James Cook and Damian Harris. Damian Harris doesn't really. So he's either going to go a big part to Nyheim Hines if you feel that and it's not going to go to Latavius Murray. So a big part to Nyheim Hines if you think he's taking a big chunk. And that would, if Nyheim Hines does take a big role, you would start to be correct. That would eat into the additional players. But I believe those.
Does he play a role? Like, one thing that
I don't know that he makes the team personally.
Well, this is what we gotta ask ourselves when it comes to Nyheim Hines. Why didn't they include him in the offense last year when they traded for him? And one of the things Hines has said this offseason was that the Bills playbook was very difficult for him to pick up on in short notice, and that he wasn't necessarily at a point where he could run a lot of the stuff the Bills would have wanted him to do. So if that was the case, well, that would maybe make you think that there will be a bigger role for him this year after having an entire offseason. Obviously, he's not going to be a guy that's going to get the ball on the ground, but we are talking about a running back that's had over 60 receptions a few times in his NFL career. If they use him in the passing game, then you really got to wonder how the ball is going to get spread out later. And I like what Spin said. If you have 120 targets between Sherfield, Hardy, and Shakir, who really cares how it's separated? I guess is my thing. I guess the big thing that would differentiate what I'm saying compared to some other people is I'm a lot higher on Hardy than most.
That's fine.
So I would say I want him to get a good portion of that. Now, I don't expect him to be a 50 catch, 700-yard guy, but I do think he could be a 30 to 40 catch guy if healthy, get 500, 600 yards depending on his role. We'll see with Sherfield and Shakir. Ultimately, is it going to make a huge difference either way? Probably not.
Yeah. So I think that 120's high. I don't know that that's so. I'm sitting here saying I think Sherfield's got targets. I don't even know that there's 120. That's only if you start to deviate some of those Singletary. So where's Kincaid snaps or his targets are going to come from? But that I do agree that a lot of what I was trying to get at before, unless you think it's going to be Hines, I think a lot of those 50-something targets are going to go to into the slot, into a helper situation, in the flat situation for Dalton Kincaid. So I think that that's where a lot of his targets are going to start to be into. Cooks will get an uptick, and I think a lot of those 50 or so targets will go to Kincaid. That's really where I'm getting his targets from. Cook will take a tick up, and then Kincaid will take a plethora of those. And then, let's say, here's the difference, Mike. You're probably betting favorite that it won't be Sherfield. However, I'm nowhere near like the level you're at of certainty that it won't be. Like, I think that you're more likely to be right, but I think that there is a decent shred of percentage that Sherfield could win that target battle of say it's 120. I don't know it's going to be that many. That's a lot. There is a decent chance he can come away with 50 of those. I don't think that that's far-fetched for him to win that 50 to 60 targets. He might not be. He might end up getting cut. But I think that there is a percentage that's fairly reasonable, not one, maybe in the 20s, that it could be him. Factoring in he's been relatively healthy. He'll get a jersey on game day. There's a lot of factors to me that could make it be him. But you're right.
He's a good player. He's a good player. I guess. And this will be the last thing I'll say, Kevin. I wouldn't be surprised if Sherfield makes the team and carves out a role. Like I said, I do think that Khalil Shakir and Sherfield will be battling for basically the last viable receiver spot on this team, meaning a guy that could make a minimal impact to maybe slightly more of an impact depending on injuries and things with the depth chart. My rebuttal to this would be with Sherfield is, how often do you see someone in the NFL, especially a 6-year player, really carve out a breakout role. It's very rare in the NFL for guys beyond the third, fourth year to really become that guy. With Sherfield, yes, we're excited because of his blocking, and that's probably the biggest contribution he'll make to this Bills team will be in his blocking element. But for those excited about his 30 receptions for 417 yards and 2 touchdowns last year, I mean, we got to tone it down. That included a 75-yard touchdown. So really, we're talking about 29 receptions for 350 yards in the other 16 games. That's not a ton of production when we're talking about it. And then over the course of his career, 67 receptions for 844 yards in 78 games. We're talking about this is his 4th team. He spent 3 years in Arizona, one of which they made the playoffs. He spent a year in San Francisco where they made the playoffs. Then goes to Miami where they make the playoffs. This isn't something where he's been on bad teams with bad talent evaluators. He's been on teams that have gone to the playoffs, and those coaches did not give him starting opportunities. So it's unlikely that suddenly at the age of 27, he comes to Buffalo and then carves out a larger role on probably the most talented roster that he's been on during his career. Now, a weaker receiver room, I'll acknowledge, but he hasn't exactly torn it up in his career. I'm just saying, if we're killing guys like Isaiah McKenzie and Gabe Davis, it doesn't make sense to then suddenly, and I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm saying there's some fans that have done this. It doesn't make sense to suddenly prop up a guy like Trent Sherfield. You're kind of failing the expectations game, where if you start propping this person up, he's not going to go beyond your expectations. You're only going to get disappointed when he doesn't get there. So we got to be smarter than that. He can have a role. He can contribute. But let's not expect him to suddenly be even what Isaiah McKenzie was last year from a production standpoint.
I think what's interesting about the Sherfield debate is that he didn't really, he had more snaps last year, the same amount of snaps last year that he did in the first 4 years combined. And I think you saw some of the things pop for him in terms of his run blocking ability, his ability after the catch, his ability to play inside outside. So I think that there is many things that people like about him, but at the end of the day, it's like anything else. Like, I don't know, for me, I think that he's going to be more useful in the offense than you do, but I also, if Sherfield barely played and it was Shakir, would I be shocked or upset? Absolutely not. I would be interested in that scenario. If it's shorter for some reason, sure, great. I don't think, like, I'm not guaranteeing it, or nor do I think that he needs to be playing, but I think I'm a little higher based on some of his splits than say you are, just because he generally is a player who does a lot of everything, and it will get him a jersey. And the best way to get the things we're talking about here is to get a jersey first. Like, that's number one. And so with him having a jersey will then earn him extra reps. I think he's got a leg up, and I think Hardy's going to be used in a role that he's going to have a carved rollout anyways, regardless. I don't see a scenario where it's only Hardy in these roles, like you said, unless there's an injury somewhere. But I like to think he's going to have a role carved out for him regardless of the scenario.
Yeah, and that's definitely entirely possible. And like I said, I'm not saying that Sherfield can't contribute if given the opportunity. If he gets that fourth receiver role on this team, he could get 15, 20 catches. I guess I'm just not expecting him to replicate what he did last year. I could be completely wrong on that. I believe that you look at what Hardy was paid, what he has done in the past as a younger player, explosive, and some of the things he can do. I think Hardy is the newcomer that's going to get a prominent role. I think Kincaid is going to get added receptions. At the end of the day, I hope Sherfield or Khalil Shakir can both have a chance at making contributions. I still want to believe that Khalil Shakir has some untapped potential. I don't think he's ever going to be a 60, 70 catch guy, but we have to remember what the Bills were doing in the playoffs last year. After not using Khalil Shakir in the regular season much, they utilized him in Miami. Now, he had the one drop on the the long pass from Allen. But if he catches that, hauls it in, we might be talking a little bit about Khalil Shakir right now compared to what the narrative is right now. So a lot of this, we'll just have to see what goes on. And this is why training camp is nice, because you actually get a look into what's going on at practice. But we'll just have to see how it plays out. And that's definitely something I'm going to be looking for when I am at training camp next week.
Going to definitely be a really good scenario on this slot. So I think it's just good. Like you said, there's a lot of for sure on the roster. There is, for the most part. Will Vaughn play? That's a question. Well, when will he play? I err on the side of team needs to win games, earn this 1 seed if they can. Play him as soon as he's cleared. I don't believe in, if there's a mental hurdle or he's not ready like Trey was, that's completely fine. But in terms of that, I think he's used to this. He's had injuries happen before. He's targeting week 1, whether it's week 2 to 6, fine. But I don't think it's one of those things where you guarantee he sits out to week 10. That's not like the mindset I'm in with Vaughn. But outside of Vaughn, most of the defense is set for the majority beside the one linebacker spot. Heads up to Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams. Will it be Dodson, Klein, Spector even? What's going to happen at the one spot? From what I've heard, I don't see much of a corner battle anywhere at the time with Trey, Taron Johnson, and Kyer at the moment. We'll see if Dane Jackson or Cam Dantzler can factor in that at all. And then safeties obviously set with your 2 safeties, Matt Milano. The D-line's kind of set interior-wise. So most of that set on defense, most of offensive set. We talked about right guard. I think Connor McGovern's pretty much given left guard. I don't think there's much of a battle there. Could be wrong. But outside of that, I don't know that there's much beside the slot position. So you got right guard, the slot, and then the linebacker spot. And then if and when Vaughn comes back. Outside of those few, and that's not really even a thing to monitor, really, like a battle. So you really only have 3 battles to watch. And this is the biggest one in terms of like what's most important to this roster. Right guard, you could argue right guard. But this one is a big one. And I don't believe whoever fills in for middle linebacker I think that they'll take over and it'll be a good transition with as strong as that defense is. And if not, there's a guy right there to swap out. So the linebacker, I'm not overly focused on. I'm more interested in, but slot is the true position that I think could be like pivotal to this offense and an upgrade potentially with all the guys we're talking about, an upgrade. This offense, who finished DVOA number 2, could be an upgrade in general across the board at many spots between health, the repair at offensive line, the running situation, the tight end situation, and then factoring into the slot. There's definitely upgrades across the board on the offensive side of the ball. I believe the defensive line's a big upgrade, some good depth pieces in the secondary that they didn't have last year. So to me, the most interesting thing still, though, with all that being said, is the slot role breaking down. So that's why, to me, I don't know that Sherfield's going to win those target counts. But I think there's a path to it. And if it is, I wouldn't be totally shocked because of the things he does when he's not getting targets. That's why he might be on the field, thus getting him targets. So that's kind of my mindset of why you want him on the field, even in plays where it's not going to go to him. And that might equal him to start eating into that 120 a little bit in target share, because he's going to be a good blocker in the slot, block for Josh Allen. He's going to block for, in different RPO situations. There's definitely a huge advantage to having him in the game, and that might get him in the game. So that's kind of where I go with, you can't just have him in the game if we're running plays in 12 personnel or whatever personnel you might be running, 11 personnel. So I think that you're more going to see if you put them in 12 personnel, they're going to be running most likely, I think. So in a mindset, like, you're going to need to get him past snaps. And that's why I think that's ultimately, to sum it all up, why I think that Trent Sherfield will win.
I agree. I mean, I have no issue if he gets wide receiver 4. I have no issue if he gets it. And if you want to call him wide receiver 3 and make Deontay Hardy wide receiver 4, where Hardy has the gadget role and Sherfield is coming in to block, no worries either way. I'm totally content with that. I have no problems from that perspective at all. It's going to be fun to see how it plays out, because I do think Khalil Shakir is part of this conversation. I do think he's kind of become a little bit of the forgotten wide receiver in the room. He went from last year being a 5th-round pick that we were all high on to showing some flashes to now he's kind of being undervalued. And let's see how he does in his second camp with the Bills. If Khalil Shakir flashes, that could change a lot of how we look at things. So I do think, regardless of how it plays out with the receiver room, it's going to be okay. I know, according to some of the people like Clay and other people looking at the receiver room, they'll say it's one of the weaker rooms in the league outside of Stephon Diggs. I don't 100% agree with that. I think on paper they look like a weak room, but I do think there's a lot of potential, especially with the guys on the lower end. And I do think that even, like I said earlier, Gabe Davis is being undervalued a little bit at this current point. So I will add this, though. Even if the Bills' offense is upgraded from a roster and talent perspective, it's not a guarantee they're going to do better in terms of production on the field. We got to remember they averaged 28.5 points last year per game, second in the NFL. They had one of the best yards per drive. They scored on about 45% of their drives last year. The real areas where the Bills' offense killed themselves was they were not good in the red zone. They were middle of the pack in the red zone, and they struggled with turnovers. I guess if you're looking at it from a metric standpoint, how do the Bills get better this year? Well, reduce your turnovers and become more efficient in the red zone. That's how you would go from 28.5 points a game to 30-plus points a game. But it's hard to do that in the NFL, especially when other teams are adjusting to what you've done the year before, while also having as productive numbers with the yards per play, the yards per drive, and all of those advanced numbers. If the Bills' yards per drive and yards per play go down, they're still not going to score 30-plus points a game, even if they improve in the red zone, even if they reduce their turnovers. So you look at NFL offenses through the years, it's really hard to get past that 30 points per game threshold. So even the teams like Kansas City, you don't really see that. So, or at least often. So I do think we're seeing an upgraded team. Hopefully, when push comes to shove, that means they capitalize in the big moments against the big teams, the big opponents when they need to. But overall, I do expect them to be around the same points per game this year overall. And I just do want to address one quick thing about the defense, because I know you probably have to wrap this up soon. The middle linebacker position is going to be fascinating to me because fans have been against Tyrell Dodson. Fans don't want him to get the job because he really hasn't stepped to a high level when Tremaine Edmonds was out of the game. If Terrell Bernard or Balin Spector somehow win that job, that is going to be the greatest unknown in question mark on this team heading into week one. Because you look at this Bills defense, they're elite in all aspects. They have a very good defensive line when healthy. They have an incredible secondary. But that's your one point on the defense where you don't know what they're going to do. And is that going to be enough of a hole to where it could potentially hold back the defense? I don't think so, Kevin. I think the rest of the guys around them are good enough to carry this defense regardless of what happens at middle linebacker. My only really other two questions I have for this defense is when does time and age start to play a role? When do some of these veterans start regressing? It is inevitable that at some point Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Von Miller, and guys like that are not going to be playing at an all-pro level or a top 10 level of their position at some point.
Right.
Do we still have another year of elite production from them? And I know, and then the last question I have is regarding cornerback too. I'm with you. I think it's Kaiir Elam's job. I know a lot of people in the media have been saying it's not over yet. It's a competition. I don't believe it's a competition. From what I've been told from people that know players on the team, they tell me Kaiir is ready to step up and that the coaches are challenging him. They want him to be the guy. But if he struggles in training camp, is there a path for Dane Jackson or Christian Benford to line up across from Trey White? I don't think so, but I wouldn't rule it out completely.
There we go. So there you have it. So we'll be back at you next week with a lot more training camp nuggets. We're going to save a little bit of middle linebacker corner too. We'll kind of expand more on what we're seeing. Will there be any injury news to come in once players check in next Tuesday? We'll have to bring you that and more Lastly, I did want to take a quick second to shout out the Cover One meetup, July 28th at 6 p.m. at Fally on Allen, 28th at 6 p.m. I believe most of the Cover One guys will be there. Love to chat with you, talk ball, and talk after some training camp. So make sure you get out there and you, if you're in the area, you check it out and you see some of the Cover One guys for some fun. Please smash the like button as well. Check out our new merch store. But we'll be right back at you next week at 7 o'clock to go over this and more as training camp is finally here. The next time we talk, the next day will be open practices right in the morning. So we'll be here, talk about check-ins and more next week as we kind of count down to training camp begins. And we'll be bringing you everything that we have in store next week. So make sure you tune in Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And looking forward to kicking this year off as this excitement begins. But Kevin, Mike, we'll be back at you next Tuesday at 7.